now, Jack, they have a new offensive coordinator, and I had a chance to catch up with him. We'll play a couple clips of the show, but what was your initial reaction to the hiring of Phillip Montgomery as the new offensive coordinator?
I'm always a big fan of bringing in former head coaches. I think that brings a lot if they have the right mindset. And your conversation with him on Border to Border on ESPN Richmond, I think showed that he has the right mindset coming into this. He doesn't think he's too big for it or anything like that. It's a guy who knows how to win. It's a guy that has manned the entire ship before. And I think that helps Brent Pry out. I think bringing that type of energy into the building is always good. It shows that Brent Pry is trying to work to become better himself. And you bring in as many different mindsets and as many different schools of thinking into it. And I think this was a very solid hire. And thank goodness it didn't take what felt like 2 years like the Sam Seifkes hire took.
Yeah, and it was interesting, the original hire that we were talking about, because previously, the week before, the name came out of the coach from the Bills who had William Mary ties, and I
Yeah.
was very intrigued by that because yeah, looking at William Mary's offense under him, they wrote an article in the Athletic about him, and so I was getting really excited. But then nothing really happened for like a week until they announced this name. And I'll tell you this, Jack, the first thing is, I tried not to confuse him with Scotty Montgomery, who also was a head coach and who wasn't necessarily the best head coach. And so I had to make sure to stare at the name as I was doing the interview because there's also Scotty Montgomery who's out there as well.
Yeah, Scotty Montgomery, not to be confused with Phillip Montgomery. Phillip Montgomery, though, former head coach of Tulsa is his background. An air raid guy, that's his background. You had asked a couple great questions about that because I know you are a run the ball type of guy, and they didn't do that a lot this last season. So I think you were a little worried when Montgomery got hired, but then after he talked to you about his style, he actually runs it kind of about 50% of the time with passing. So not the traditional air raid, but I think he'll bring a really solid base into this. He knows what he's doing and can get things going relatively quickly because it feels like we're pretty late into the offseason to be introducing new coordinators into all of this.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you think air raid, you think pass, 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 pass. But I actually asked Coach Montgomery about that and said, "Do you still plan to try and maintain some balance?" This is what he had to say.
No, we don't. I mean, we still have an emphasis. We want to be balanced in what we do. Obviously, each week will kind of be generated off of what that game plan is. But, at some point in time, you're going to run across a defense that is going to be able to take away, if you're a one-dimensional type of offense, it's going to be able to take something away from you. And so to be balanced and make them really respect both aspects of that, I think helps you in the long run.
Yeah, and it's looking at the numbers at what he did at Tulsa, he had some teams where he had better wide receivers and a better passing game, so they passed it a little bit more. There were years where he had better running backs, and he decided to run it a little bit more, and that's really good, Jack, to have that flexibility to be able to say, all right, let's look at this roster, and then that's how we're going to decide what we're going to do.
And I think that's so important for college football coaches in the era that we're in. We can talk about NIL, all of that good stuff, but like your team's going to look different year over year. So some years you're going to have an excellent quarterback and a fantastic wide receiver one. So you want to pass it a little bit more. Sometimes you'll have a great O line and a great running back, and you'll want to see him run it more. Coaches who are so stubborn in wanting to run their style of offense at the college level, I feel like sometimes fail. And hearing that that's not the way he wants to do it is a real green flag for Hokie fans and for Phillip Montgomery.
Yeah, and it's something that, and I use this example a lot on my radio show. We can look at the rival school, Virginia, when Tony Elliott got hired the first year and had a ready-made offense with Brennan Armstrong and a bunch of really good wide receivers. He tried to run an offense that didn't really fit the system. It was a miserable fit. Brennan Armstrong had his worst season, and there were already questions early on in the Tony Elliott tenure. This guy, Coach Montgomery, doesn't look like he's going to be that. He's going to say, all right, well, look, we got really good quarterbacks. We got a young wide receiver room, so maybe we are going to run the ball a little bit, at least early on.
Yeah, and the people he's coached as well, nice long list of names, including RG3. But yeah, it should be it should be good. Of course, we're in the honeymoon phase of all of this. This is the point where you're looking at the beautiful press release of what Virginia Tech released, and you're like, whoa, he did what? That's crazy. He was coaching the Birmingham Stallions this last year, so that is worth saying. Wasn't in the college football ranks, so there could be something to be said there. But on paper, this looks like a great hire for head coach Brent Pry.
Yeah, and he wasn't necessarily the best head coach at Tulsa, but he kind of learned because part of the way through, he was the play caller as well. That's something that, at least early on in your coaching career, you probably want to stay away from being the head coach and the coordinator because it's so much to do, timeouts, challenges, getting people in and out of the lineup. So I think that's something he's kind of learned a little bit. One of the questions that I asked him that we didn't cut was about, do you learn things a little differently and can you be a different coordinator having the head coach experience? And he talked about how that's going to help out a little bit because he understands what Coach Pry is going through and can bring that perspective as well besides being the OC.
Yeah, that'll be big for him. I feel like this is a put up or shut up year too for Brent Pry. I feel like fans are getting a little restless with him. All those high expectations coming into this year. I mean, the school funneled away NIL money from men's basketball to football to try and push them over the hump this year, and Brent Pry and the team didn't deliver. And going out and getting Phillip Montgomery, going out and getting Seifkis, are the hires that tell me that Pry feels like this is some heat on him a little bit, and yet going out and getting that former Tulsa head coach, bringing him in, allowing him to help out in the ways that I think he will. Big time hire for Pry as he feels a little. I think there's some kindling being put under his seat.
Yeah, and I liked how he admitted that, previously with the other coaches he's had, he hasn't done a good job of building coaching chemistry.
Yeah.
And he talks about, we always talk about, we focus on two kinds of chemistry, players chemistry and players and coaches chemistry, but we never really focus on the coaches chemistry. And he admitted in that press conference that he hasn't done a good job fostering relationships within his coaching core. And now he's trying to do that. And I think that's going to help a little bit because remember, they brought in the West Virginia offensive line coach, and he's a really good one and brought several offensive linemen from West Virginia with him. But you need a cohesion between all the different unit coaches.
That's a great point because I don't think we realize how many hours these guys spend together in the same room. And for all intents and purposes, they are coworkers. And imagine being in the same room of a coworker you hate 12 hours before the biggest, most pressure packed moment of your life up to that point. And if you do not have that chemistry, things can go wrong. We've seen it at times with blowups on sidelines and other programs, and that has caused rifts across teams. Didn't see that with Virginia Tech, but it's good that Brent Pry saw that issue, addressed it, and has hopefully fixed it with some of these hires.
Another thing that Coach Montgomery talked about was tempo and how much he wants his teams to go. And I asked him about that on my interview on ESPN Richmond.
As a weapon and as a tool to be able to manipulate and do things within games, try to keep defenses off balance. Put them in positions where they don't feel comfortable. But we want to be aggressive. We want to be attacking, and we want guys to understand we're going to use the whole field when we do it.
Yeah, and that was something that kind of was bothersome. I mean, Tech seemed to be the special team that always threw the ball behind the line of scrimmage and then expected their wide receivers to do a lot of the work in terms of getting the first down. Phillip Montgomery's offense is a little bit more down the field, which is something we kind of thought we were going to get last year, and unfortunately we did not.
Yeah, I love your annoyance with last year's Virginia Tech offense. I think it was evident when he left the job to go to Ohio State to become the offensive line coach up there. He played a very, very – if you said, Jack, what do you expect a offensive line specialist who is an offensive coordinator, what would you expect his offense to look like? That's what I would say when he had the talent to maybe lean more into this air raid-esque type of Phillip Montgomery style. So hopefully – Pop Watson or Drones or whoever the quarterback is week one, gets the opportunity to open some things up.
Yeah, and that leads us into the next soundbite where I asked him basically about how excited he is to work with Kyron Drones and Pop Watson, who I think will see the field this year.
Yeah, I think both of those guys and some other guys in the room I think are really talented guys, and it's one of the things that really attracted me to really go after this job. This is a job I really wanted and pursued, and was fortunate enough to be here, and really honored about that. But, you look at the quarterback room, you look across college football, teams that got trigger guys that got established quarterbacks, you have a better chance of being successful and getting those guys on the right track. And so I'm excited about both of them. Look forward to working with both of them, watching them kind of grow, develop, learn, mature, because I think both of them got great futures.
Yeah, and I like that Pop Watson was included there too, because I think we saw last year at the end of the season, he's got some talent and he's got some things, but he just was a little raw. And I think another offseason will help him tremendously.
Maybe he's the QB1 though. Maybe he does have a good offseason. Is there QB controversy brewing in Blacksburg?
I don't think so. I don't think Kyron Jones came back to be the backup here. I mean, look, if Kyron is really bad or seems disinterested or doesn't fit in this offense, then he's probably going to transfer and Pop is your number one. But I think Kyron came back with the understanding he's going to be number one. I was more surprised that Pop came back knowing that Kyron was already back, because that was the order. Kyron said, I'm coming back, and then Pop said he was coming back. So he obviously saw something. I'm sure the NIL was probably good enough for Pop to come back, but I think it's going to be interesting to see how these two quarterbacks fit in the system. And does RG3 call Kyron, and maybe do they talk about what a Phillip Montgomery offense is like?
That could be. Yeah. Does he rely on some of his past contacts, some of his past pupils to see how it all does? I will say quarterbacks are a weird breed of human. And I say that in the most loving way, because quarterbacks are some of the best interviews. But when you talk to quarterbacks and you're like, so why'd you decide on X school if they already had the incumbent starter? They're like, I wanted to bet on myself. I believe I'm the best. I'm going to go out there and win. Could have been what Pop was thinking, that, I have that experience. Virginia Tech is the one I picked. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to compete for that QB1 job. And if I don't get it, I'll be the best. I'll be the best teammate, and then he'll be ready to go his following year. But that could be the reason why Bob Watson could think he's good enough to beat drones in a quarterback battle this offseason.
I think it's funny. Phillip Montgomery's ties to Virginia Tech, for people who are not familiar and may not remember, Phillip Montgomery was the head coach of Tulsa when Virginia Tech played their last game under Frank Beamer, and it was a back and forth affair. Now, granted, the scoring dried up in the second half, but it had, and I'm trying to remember the statistic, it had the most points in a half in a bowl game for like 1 year. And then the next year there was another high scoring half in the bowl game. But people will remember how that game was back and forth. Brewer at quarterback for Virginia Tech. And I believe Evans was at quarterback for Tulsa. But that was a really fun game, and the first look for a lot of Hokies fans at what Coach Montgomery does.
Oh my goodness. I just looked up that. That was the 2015 Independence Bowl. 55-52 final. Virginia Tech scored 24 points in the first quarter, 21 points in the second quarter, then 10 combined points in the second half. Tulsa scored 31 points in the first half and 21 points in the second half. And Tech won, but shout out Tulsa for covering the spread. They were a 13.5-point underdog, and they lost by 3.
And Coach Montgomery said he doesn't remember too much from that game, other than he gave a lot of credit to the Hokies defense, which clearly the Hokies defense didn't show up in that game. It felt like, and I don't remember, obviously in the time it was 2015, but this feels like it was one of those games where maybe neither team wanted to be there. And then all of a sudden it was one of those, hey, let's just put on a show for everybody, or at least in the first half, as you said. And then things for Virginia Tech dried up. But that was pretty funny. It's an interesting tie, because that's when Frank Beamer decided to hang it up. Well, he had decided before then, but that was his last game.